What's going on, guys? I'm CFB Kings, and welcome back to another episode of the CFBKings Show. Really appreciate you tuning in. We are officially in college football season. We just had week 0, which was awesome. It was so much fun just to get to watch college football again, where I didn't know what was going to happen. I'd spent so much of the offseason watching games from 2023, 2022, even further back, and it was nice to be able to watch a game where I didn't know what the final score was going to be, and it's just awesome to have it back. So the headliner of week 0, of course, Georgia Tech defeated number 10 Florida State 24-21 out in Ireland. It was a phenomenal game, really close the entire way. I don't think it was ever separated by 2 possessions. I think it was a 1-possession margin the entire game. So phenomenal way to get the season started. A top 10 team has already gone down, which is insane, and it was just a great game all the way throughout. So for Florida State, it was a brutal way to start the season. They have now lost back-to-back games, going back to the Orange Bowl last year, and with everything that they had on their minds in terms of hopes of defending their ACC title and going back to the college football playoff, all of that certainly took a hit. The biggest thing about this game was that it was a week 0 conference game. So Florida State is already 0-1 in ACC play, and if they're trying to get an auto bid to the college football playoff, those hopes have taken a massive hit. So it's not much of a stretch to say that Florida State really can't lose another conference game. I mean, they could lose to Florida at the end of the year, but they really can't afford another ACC loss unless Georgia Tech loses 3 times because in conference play for Georgia Tech, because Georgia Tech is 1-0 in ACC play, and they have that head-to-head over Florida State. So it's not unreasonable to say that Florida State basically has to win every ACC game from here on out in order to get a spot in that ACC championship game. In that game, Georgia Tech really looked like the more complete team. They were vastly improved from where they had been in 2023 on defense, getting Romello Height from USC on the edge, and returning guys like Eford and Clayton Powell-Lee. They were monstrous in that game. And overall, Georgia Tech, especially with Haynes King's improvement too, he was much better decision-making, didn't turn the ball over. They had a couple close calls where they nearly lost a fumble, but got both of them back. And overall, it was a very clean game from the Yellow Jackets. They had these long, sustained drives where they didn't give Florida State the ball for like half of a quarter and gave their defense some rest, kept Florida State on the sideline, and overall, it was a well-played and well-coached game from Georgia Tech. The writing was kind of on the wall for this game in terms of Georgia Tech's ability to win it. And if you watch my Week 0 preview, I said that basically in the entirety of Brent Key's tenure as Georgia Tech's head coach, they've always played to the level of their opponent. And here's what I said in last week's episode. Part of what makes me really intrigued in the potential for this to be a close and exciting game is that for basically all of last season and really under head coach Brent Key's entire tenure at Georgia Tech, the Yellow Jackets have always played to the level of their opponent, and often that means better than their good opponents and worse than their bad opponents. For example, last year Georgia Tech lost to Bowling Green by double digits, but then beat number 17 Miami a week later. They lost by 15 to Boston College, who went 7-6, and then beat number 17 North Carolina a week after that. Better than their good opponents and worse than their bad opponents. And that has just been kind of the thing over the past 2 years, and now heading into 2024 as well. I mean, Florida State was a 11.5-point favorite, a double-digit favorite, and Georgia Tech really looked like the better team yesterday. So now the question for the Yellow Jackets is, next week against Georgia State, are they going to look like the team that just beat a top 10 opponent and the ACC favorite in Florida State, or are they going to be the team like last year who lost to Bowling Green by double digits? So Georgia Tech's got a ton of momentum right now. They're the talk of college football with, kind of being the major game yesterday in week 0. But now the question for the Yellow Jackets and Brent Key's team is to see if they can continue that and not have those games like they did last year where they played down to the level of their opponent and lost to teams that they probably shouldn't have. Georgia Tech improved to 5-0 against ranked ACC opponents under Brent Key. When he took over in 2022, the very first game that he won was against number 24 Pitt on the road. They also beat number 13 North Carolina on the road in that year. Then last season, they beat number 17 Miami on the road, as well as number 17 North Carolina at home. And now they've got to win over a number 10 Florida State squad as well. So 5-0 against ranked ACC opponents in just about a year and a half with Brent Key at the helm. I tweeted yesterday right after the game that the Yellow Jackets will be ranked this season for the first time since 2015, a year where they coincidentally also beat a top 10 Florida State squad. So very interesting start to the year for the Yellow Jackets, and it'll be interesting to see how they can continue to build on it. To make the case for Florida State going forward, they have the talent and potential. They have the coach in Mike Norvell to make something of this season still. Of course, there is the 12-team college football playoff now, so losing a conference game is big in terms of getting into the ACC championship and potentially winning it to get one of those top 4 seeds and an auto bid. But there are still 8 other at-large spots, or 7, I guess, with the group of 5 auto bid. So there's 7 other at-large spots that are still in play for them. If they win out, of course, they'll probably be in the ACC championship unless there's an undefeated team and a one-loss Georgia Tech or something like that. But everything is still in front of them. Losing this game is it obviously is a damper to start the season with, but they can still accomplish everything that they set out to do this year. The quarterback play from Uiagalelei, like I mentioned, wasn't top tier. It wasn't what they had necessarily with Jordan Travis last year. They didn't really throw downfield, and when they tried to, they couldn't complete it. DJ had a number of passes either behind the line of scrimmage or 2 or 3 yards downfield. The dynamic play at quarterback that they had with Travis last year, who finished 5th in Heisman voting, just was not there yesterday. And that's not to say that it can't be, but this is kind of the same performance that we saw with Uiagalelei at Oregon State, at Clemson. Clemson was a very good team all the years that he was there, but they won the ACC title in 2022 after Uiagalelei was benched and Klubnik came in. They went 9-3, I think, in 2021 with Uiagalelei as the starter. So, that could be the season that Florida State's in for, but which wouldn't be bad. Obviously, if you go 9-3 and win a bowl game, a 10-win season's not anything to be ashamed of, especially after losing all the production that they did. But this has just kind of been the thing that we've seen with DJ and the teams that he's been a part of. I think Oregon State was 8-4, 8-5, something like that last year. But it'll be interesting to see going forward if they can rebound from this and turn things around. The other games in week 0, I tweeted about this yesterday that the game, like basically every game yesterday was solid except for Hawaii Delaware State, which Hawaii was a 41-point favorite and won by 21. So even in that regard, that game was closer than it was expected to be by 3 touchdowns. So basically every game yesterday was good. Every underdog covered, and Georgia Tech won outright. Nevada was very close to winning. New Mexico was very close to winning. The Lobos were a 14.5-point underdog when the game started to FCS Montana State. They led that game by 17 points in the fourth quarter. They had a 98.5% chance to win, according to the ESPN probability chart. But Montana State roared back in the fourth quarter, took the lead with 11 or 12 seconds left in the game, and got out of there with a win. So the first 2 games of the season were Georgia Tech beating a top 10 opponent in Florida State and FCS Montana State beating FBS New Mexico. So we already have an FCS over FBS win. We already have a top 10 team go down. And if the rest of the season is anything like week 0, we're in for a great one. SMU was a 27.5-point favorite over Nevada when that game started. They trailed by 11 going into the fourth quarter. We had 2 double-digit fourth quarter comebacks in Montana State and SMU. The Mustangs won their first game as a Power 4 team, as an ACC team, and it took some heroics from quarterback Preston Stone and wide receiver RJ Maryland to make that happen late in the game. Nevada had an 83.4% chance to win that in the fourth quarter. SMU had a safety in the fourth quarter to draw within 1 point, and it was a perfect pass from Stone to Maryland with just over a minute left for the Mustangs to take the lead. So that was a game that was much closer than expected. SMU was a 4-touchdown favorite and trailed by double digits in the fourth quarter. So they got out of there with a win, which is all they were really looking for. But they did make a bunch of major mistakes at the beginning of the game. They outgained Nevada by 110 yards. They were -1 in the turnover margin. They had a snap go over their punter's head or like off his hands and went way back. They had an interesting penalty called. It was 4th and 15. They were about to get the ball back from Nevada, and they had a penalty called on one of their players for allegedly spitting on an opponent. So it was 4th and 15 when that penalty was called too. So it went from Nevada punting to having a first down on a drive, which they then went and scored a touchdown. That was their last touchdown of the game towards the end of the third quarter. So very interesting there. The SMU player who had that penalty called on him was vehemently denying it, and they mentioned on the broadcast that he was basically saying that he was spitting on the ground. So that was an interesting part of the game too. Overall, week 0 was a ton of fun, and like I said, if any other week this season is like week 0, then we're in for a solid fall. So, I wanted to do a segment here called Kings of the Week, and this is something that I did on Instagram and Twitter. I did like King of the Game, basically like an MVP for a lot of the major games last season, and kind of like doing it just to highlight some of the major performances of each week. So first we've got Haynes King from Georgia Tech. He had 200 total yards. He was 11 of 16 passing, which is a 68% completion percentage, 68.8. But he looked much improved from where he was last year. There were multiple drives where they ran him over and over and over again, and he was just a workhorse for them. Not only throwing the ball, he was 11 of 16, like I said, but he had 15 carries for 54 yards too. So he had more carries than their starting running back, Jamal Haynes, did. and he was good in his own right. He had 11 carries for 75 yards and 2 touchdowns. But Haynes King. I made a post about second-year transfer quarterbacks who had seen some success in the past, and how Haynes King is in his second year at Georgia Tech since transferring from Texas A&M, and potentially how he might perform this season. And I put that out a couple of days ago, and already first game of the 2024 season, it's looking like Haynes King could have a big year for the Yellow Jackets. Another player who shined in week 0 was SMU wide receiver RJ Maryland. He had 8 receptions for 162 yards and a touchdown. That touchdown was with just over a minute left, like I mentioned, and was the game winner for the Mustangs. There were a number of times where he was just wide open. He burned several Nevada DBs and averaged 20.3 yards per catch in that game. So he came up clutch for them down the stretch and was a major factor in the Mustangs getting out of Reno with a win. And lastly, we've got the Montana State Bobcats offensive line. In week 0, Montana State had 362 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns against New Mexico. They had a running back, Adam Jones, with 17 carries for 167 yards and a touchdown. They had Scott Trey Humphrey, who had 19 carries for 140 yards and a touchdown. Their quarterback, Tommy Mellott, had 30 yards rushing and a touchdown. And like I said, 362 yards rushing. Their team averaged 7.7 yards per carry on the ground. So especially late in that game too, they busted long runs of 93 yards, I think was their longest, and that line was just making gaps up front and was a major key in them coming back against New Mexico and pulling off that 35-31 win. That's about all that I had for this episode. Really appreciate you tuning in. Week 0 was a blast, and like I said towards the beginning, if the rest of the season is anything like week 0, then we're really in for a great fall. So make sure to follow CFB Kings on Twitter and Instagram, especially for Saturdays, but really all throughout the week. Every day I'm posting constant college football news, updates, highlights, all sorts of stuff. So make sure to check that out if you haven't already. Subscribe here if you're watching on YouTube, or follow on Spotify if you're listening in podcast form, and make sure to come back next time for some more college football content. Thank you so much for watching. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and take care.